I've been directly involved in the launch of over a dozen multi-site campuses through the churches I've led, and half of them have been in movie theaters. I'm convinced that every church leader should consider using a theater for your next campus or church plant. They're flexible, culturally relevant locations, typically in the center of the community that you're trying to reach. Regal is the only theater company with a dedicated team of full-time consultants ready to help your church launch and succeed in a movie theater. Check out regaltheaterchurch.com for more information on locations your church could use.
Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up and let's get started with this week's unSeminary podcast.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the unSeminary podcast. My name's Rich, the host here, and I am so honored that you've taken some time out of your busy week. We know that you've got a lot going on at your church, and we're honored that you would pop us in your earbuds and listen in to today's conversation. You're going to be rewarded for that because we've got an incredible guest. This is going to be a great, 20 minutes, just jam-packed. We've got Todd Adkins with us. He is currently with LifeWay Resources in the leadership group, does some amazing work over there. Was previously at McLean Bible, an executive pastor there. Todd, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad that you've taken some time out to be with us today. Why don't you kind of give us the Todd story? Give us the 2-minute. Who is Todd Adkins?
Well, it all started when I was just a twinkle in my father's eye.
Nice.
No, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. Literally one stoplight in the county. Grew up in smaller churches and learned a ton about leadership and everything from my father, who's a pastor. My uncles are pastors. Like everybody's a pastor. It didn't start out that way, but that's how it ended up. When I was 8, my dad became a pastor, and then everybody else did. It seemed like in our family. But the interesting thing there is he never went to seminary. He did a little bit of kind of certificate kind of work. But he never went. I ended up going to seminary after college. I was a philosophy and speech major, philosophy and rhetoric.
Nice.
So, it's either I become a lawyer or go to seminary. I thought I was going to go on the mission field at the time and ended up at Southern because it was close to my parents' house and my parents would pay for it.
Nice.
So I went there. They had an incredible leadership school. And I had 2 mentors there that completely changed who I am and how I interact with the world and how I lead. That was Brad Wagner, who was he was the dean of the leadership school. And prior to that was a gentleman named Warren Benson, who was at DTS. He was 3 days older than Moses when he was at Southern. So he was in his 80s and still coming in.
That's amazing.
And teaching. But he did, he team taught with Hendricks when Hendricks was a student, Howard Hendricks.
That's amazing.
And the legacy that he has through the books that he edited and the people that he worked with, both in church and on seminary staff, was absolutely amazing. So if I learned anything from him, it was the power of story and case study and how important those pieces are, both to the poetry and plumbing of leadership development. I think what our seminaries do a great job is teaching us the poetry part, and they miss out on the plumbing. And leadership is poetry and plumbing. It's vision that inspires, but it's also the systems and processes that deliver. So it's one thing for us to get up and create a clear conviction for development in our church. And then people get into the process, they get into the systems of our church, and things don't add up. And so that is what I'm most passionate about, is seeing some of the old systems that were in place and processes that were in place, prior to 30 years ago, were some great things. And we've gone from maps to menus, and we're not better for it. We're not better for, a Netflix mentality of church, because we do need to take people on a journey that is thoughtful, intentional, now more than ever, with how much information people are overloaded with. Sorry, that was longer than 2 minutes.
No,
it probably didn't do a whole lot of that.
No, that's wonderful.
I also have a wife and 3 kids,
nice.
7, 5, and 3. Well, just turned 4.
Nice.
So that's also,
That
very
keeps you busy,
interesting,
keeps you out of trouble.
Leading in the home as well.
Nice. Very cool. Why don't you tell us about your time at McLean? That obviously a great church. You were, pinnacle or right at the center of their kind of multi-site expansion, over the last 10 years or, 10 plus years ago. Why don't you kind of give us a sense of what was going on there?
What was going on there is it was a church that was really growing in the DC metro area. We had all kinds of zoning and legal issues all the time. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons why we went to multisite was just to continue to grow and to continue to reach DC for Christ. So we knew we could do a better job of that than, coming from Tyson's Corner in Northern Virginia over into the city or, in different parts of Maryland and around the Beltway. Mm-hmm. So, the vision there was to be sure everybody around the Beltway had a Bible-believing, church. And at that time, there wasn't that many. Now, since then, in the last 10 years, holy cow, there are so many church plants that have come in there. There's so many young, sharp, progressive leaders. But for a while, there were only like 4 or 5 of us, in my opinion, that fit that statement. So you had Cat Bap and First Pres and a couple other people. But anyway, long story short, it was our way of expanding our reach and influence and really getting the gospel into different parts. We know people are usually open to community before they're open to conversion. So it's really getting in there and making those initial connections. So in starting campuses, when we got to the third one, that's when the wheels kind of fell off. And that's when, the way that you used to do it doesn't really work anymore.
It might actually hurt you.
If you don't have your governance worked out, and especially decision rights. So we had, bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3, kind of a Lencioni thing from Politics, Silos, and Turf Wars, where we said, bucket 1 is our core DNA. You cannot change that. Now that is not, the way we do children's ministry, unless you're that big on the way you do children's ministry. Right. That's your core values. That's the main things that make you who you are. So then bucket 2 is maybe. So that's a little bit more. That comes to a strategy team, and they decide whether or not that happens. And then bucket 3, man, that's done in a working group where you've got all children's people together. And they're, wrestling through that. And, there's different transitions that happen in those different stages of growth. So we ended up with a bunch of campuses before it was all over. But to get there, we really had to dig in and address some things that were out of whack. Our systems, our structure, our processes all needed to be audited and streamlined to make that happen. And, any entropy is a natural thing. So entropy is, things fall apart on their own. And so it's a constant course correction of bringing things back. And believe it or not, your systems speak as much into your culture as the poetry pieces, because that's the day-to-day thing. Where those things are fleshed out, and also your values, all those things. If you want your values to move from being aspirational to actual, you have to address that in your systems, your processes, your training. That simply will not happen. You can't just do it from a stage once a week.
Can you give us some examples of a time, where the plumbing was getting in the way of the poetry, the stuff that you've maybe identified one of those, and then how did you pull that apart and to get better alignment so that they were, pushing in the same direction?
Totally. Probably the best example is for those people listening, if, depending on the size of your church, but the larger the church, probably the more misaligned you are and more siloed you are in your different ministry areas. So leadership applications. We did an audit. There were 26 different volunteer leader applications.
That's crazy.
Ask you a question. When you come in and you serve at a church, a lot of our people serve in more than one area. Right. We often say it's the Pareto principle. It's the 20% that are serving the other 80%. Right. And I would say we can rail on that, but in many cases it's our fault. Because when a person gets into that and they move from ministry to ministry, they're seeing a different application. They're like, why do I have to do this again? Why do I have to do this training again? And in most churches, it's onboarding at best when they say they do training. LifeWay Research did research on 2,000 pastors. 92% say that training is critical to the health and growth of their church. Yet only 1 in 4 churches have any plan in place.
Wow. When
you dig in deeper, it's onboarding. It's not, hey, I'm doing ongoing training with my children's volunteers. I'm moving that. I'm basically putting a warm body in place. I'm practicing leadership placement, not leadership development. And there's a big difference there. So, sorry, I'm already chasing a rabbit. Back to those things. Going from 26 to 1 is really painful because everybody thinks that they're so unique and so special that they have to have their own. But again, 80% of the stuff that we need is the same. 80% of the questions that we would ask would be the same. So it's creating that template and then saying, hey, children's ministry, if you want to add an addendum to the back of that, you're more than welcome. But this is this is the information we're gathering, and we're keeping in one database in one place, so we actually know what we're doing, and we don't look like a bunch of jackwagons to the people attending our church. Because somebody that's coming from the business world says, I don't know how this even works. I don't even know how this place functions.
Right. Absolutely. Were there particular in that, because I think that's a great example, and that's a great takeaway even for leaders that are listening in to say, I wonder how many different applications there are out there. I would imagine a church over even a few hundred people, you start to get individual areas start to think that their stuff is, super important, and they've got to ask it in just the right way. That would be a great takeaway, even how to, to drive in on that. Were there particular areas that were, resistant to that? And how did you deal with the resistance of saying, and don't name any names, of getting better alignment on that, even that issue?
Well, I mean, they're the traditional, there's the traditional areas of the church that happen on Sunday. But there's a lot of church that happens between Sundays, or at least there should be. Right. But the Sunday morning ministries or Monday evening ministries, we had campuses, going all through the week. But those core ministries had problems because you would have the check-in procedure and diaper policy at a performing arts theater where we only have access to the main lobby and then a rehearsal room when we do children's in that space versus the mothership, which, 100,000 square feet of children's space there. It's amazing. Yeah. It's the greatest thing you've ever. Yeah. And to help them process, again, that whole 80-20 thing, 80% of the way we do preschool ministry should be the same. 80% of the way we train people and onboard people need to be the same. Again, I understand we have to have a different diaper policy because we don't have, a bathroom in every room. We might have different check-in procedures. That's okay. But don't throw away everything for those things. And when that's your area and that's your ministry and you own it day in and day out, and you've got something that's put into place that you feel like is working, and you're like, my head is barely above water now, and you're asking me to do what? Those are big things. The other thing I would say is language is really important, because we would have in one ministry area, you would have a coach, and their job description would be very similar to what was a coordinator in another area.
Yes, very true.
And so again, it's just aligning those systems and languages. Now, to go ahead and out myself, also we said, hey, we want a one-page job description for every role in the church. Right. From volunteer, of course, to staff members. Staff members did have those, and a couple ministry areas had those, but creating that template and where those buckets fall are really important. Creating a core competency of, hey, this is what we want all of our universal core competencies. This is what we want all of our leaders to know. This is what we want all our volunteers to know, our coaches to know, our ministry staff to know. Like if you're on ministry staff, you have to have this level of competency in discipleship. in what our vision is, all those things.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of multi-site churches struggle once you get beyond 3 or 4 locations. You struggle with the campus versus central conversation. How much how much autonomy, how much, it's not even autonomy, it's how much kind of local flavor will each of our campuses have, and campus pastors become understandably so passionate about their part of the city that you're in, and they're like, hey, well, we want to do things a little bit different. And obviously leadership development is one of the ways that a campus pastor can influence the culture of their particular campus.
Totally.
How did you kind of live in that tension? How did you offer common leadership development across all the locations, but then also allow some sort of local nuance? What did that look like for you?
I would say we had to get to a point where we had a difficult conversation on how we were structured.
Yep.
So at first we were structured, the central person, the person who was over worship was in our executive team meeting for the main campus. He was over worship for the main campus. Mm-hmm. He has the way he wants to do things. And then I've got the campus pastor in Silver Spring or Arlington or someplace that has a lot of young adults. He wants his stuff to be a little different.
Right.
And so it's saying, okay, who do those people report to? Do they report to that central person who's over that, kind of ministry area, or do they report to the campus pastor? Mm-hmm. Well, they report to the campus pastor, but there was a disconnect between authority and responsibility that was there. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways we addressed that was redoing our meeting structure, where we said, hey, we're having a strategic team, and at this point, we'll have one kind of meeting for the campus pastors and, the core guys, the 2 people that, run all our facilities and run all the core services elements. They've got to be there, and the campus pastors have to be there. And then we're going to have a strategy meeting that's even above that it doesn't matter what your position is, what your title is. It's just that you are the most strategic person to think about and process some of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And that helped, really with that helped tremendously in a very short period of time.
Very cool. Well, and now why don't we pivot a little bit and talk about your work at LifeWay Leadership, and all the different, you're doing a lot of different work there to help church leaders wrestle through developing their leadership pipeline. I love that stat where you said, hey, 91% of church leaders say it's really important, and only 1 in 4 actually do anything about it. And you're obviously trying to tackle some of that. You've got a great podcast, the 5 Leadership Questions podcast. You've got a conference coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening on that front?
Okay. I would say, one of the things listeners could do is go to either My Leadership Pipeline, or they could go to LifeWay Leadership and quickly find Pipeline. Pipeline, there's a 20-page, kind of breakdown of what it is and somewhat how to implement it. Mm-hmm. But that's really the underlying philosophy of what we do. We would say, hey, every organization needs a pipeline and every person needs a pathway. Mm. We often forget that, Ephesians 2:8-9, yes, it's by grace that we've been saved. However, verse 10 says we're God's workmanship and he has things prepared for us to do. We also forget as pastors, there's only a couple places in the Bible where it's if you do this, I guarantee you this will happen. Mm-hmm. And that's in Ephesians 4, where church leaders are called to train the saints for the work of the ministry. Mm-hmm. The result of that is they will be built up and measured in the fullness of Christ Jesus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times we forget we're more doers than developers.
Right. So
and what this is trying to do is make the shift to allow you to be a developer and not just a doer. Because, a lot of people want to develop, but they don't know. They don't have, when we dug in deeper into that research, the top 4 reasons why people didn't have a plan in place is because, number 1, they didn't think they had time. Mm-hmm. Number 2, they didn't have a framework for people to walk through. Mm-hmm. 3 was they didn't know how. They didn't have the expertise in all the different areas to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. Because you're talking most of our churches don't have a bunch of staff that are specialized in ministry. The ones that do, a lot of those people, and it's a great thing, a lot of those people have been developed within the organization. And so they haven't had some of the formal training that they may have needed to. But it's just like, okay, what are the core competencies that everybody in our church knows? So we did almost 2 years of research with a large group of people, everybody from, Brad Lomenick, who was part of starting Catalyst, and Mac Lake, who's a leadership pipeline guy, the guy who does HR for Walmart, who was also an XP. So we got lots of different, Jenny Catron, who until recently was the XP at Ortberg's church. I mean, I got basically anybody that I knew that was really passionate about leadership development in the church. And we went from, I asked them all to fill out, what people needed at each level, and then we consolidated all that. It was 286 competencies.
Wow. That's amazing.
But what we ended up bringing that down was to 6 categories and putting those at different levels. And then we brought in people like Will Mancini is the best person to talk about vision that I know of on the planet.
Absolutely.
So I got him to come in and do that vision tip to tail. Paul Tripp does discipleship tip to tail, because whether you're on this very far right or you're on this side, you at least respect him on discipleship.
Absolutely.
So we very strategically went through that to create a map, not a menu, a scope and sequence for people to walk through. The pathway pieces, absolutely, your small groups person needs small groups training.
Right.
So are they new? Are they a learner? Are they a leader? Are they a multiplier? And have 3 different tracks in that section to bring people along. So, and then again, how does leadership transformation happen? It's really an overlap of knowledge, experience, and coaching. I'm not trying to digitize discipleship. I'm trying to give you mastery or proficiency in something. So when you have knowledge, that's great. And that's pretty much what we're doing now. Information dumps on people. But when you couple that with experience and coaching, that's when the magic happens, and that's when you have transformation. I mean, the way you get a driver's license is first you have to display some knowledge. You have to take your written test.
Right.
You ride alongside with somebody and drive, and you're getting coaching along the way. So I don't know why we fail to think that. I mean, we're a video enhanced system. We're not a video based driven. We're not video driven. It's not it for your entertainment or Netflix for your church. Everything we do is in a scope and sequence.
Yeah, you really should check it out. If you're the thing I love that, just to underline what you said, is the thing I love you're doing is you're providing a framework. You're providing, hey, here, beyond just here's a bunch of random resources, here's a bunch of different topics. It's like, hey, how does this all fit together to push people, to encourage people along that, development path. Anything else you want to talk about pipeline just before we move on with the lightning round?
Pipeline conference is sold out. There's less than 100 spots left, so I don't know when this will air, but if it'll air before or after the conference even, but that's sold out. The coaching day that goes along with that sold out early, and it's 420 spots.
That's great.
And that's just us walking people through in a systematic way, helping them understand that most of them have not had this is going to sound like heresy, but I learned this from Will Mancini, actually. Yep. He asked me one day, he was like, when did you have your second conversion? I'm like, what are you talking about? That's heresy. And he's like, no, when did you convert from being a doer to a developer? And man, that story hit me just like that. Right. I had started a young adult ministry. It had, a couple hundred people come in. It was great. And I went to another church, and I came back 6 months later, and it was decimated.
Right. Because you were
and I realized that I'd done it on hustle and personality of asking every friend I had to be there. And then when I went away, there was not a core conviction for leadership development there, and there were no systems and processes in place. So what we're trying to do with that is just give people that opportunity to come in and process that and say, you can do it. Yes, I know Sunday's coming, and most of the time you come somewhere 3 weeks later, you get fired up, and 3 weeks later, it's all gone because Sunday's coming. And so what we want people to walk away with is that scope and sequence and real tools to help them get along the way. It's not doing it for you, but it's just giving you a framework and some templates and tools to help you get there and achieve some early wins so that you will be willing to invest.
Literally just yesterday, I was in a conversation with a young leader who, I was challenging them to rethink their leadership and to rethink their service. And they're very much caught in that doer developer paradigm. Literally at one point in the conversation, the leader looks at me and he says, because I was asking him to develop his people. And he says, well, yeah, but it's been going well with what I'm doing and it's working. And it was like I was challenging him. And I said, yeah, listen, I'm not debating that it's working. I'm not debating that, the energy that's happening around you is positive. What I'm saying is it's not sustainable long-term and it's not what you want to do. I can't have you just being a doer. I need you to develop people. I need you to be handing off these pieces of the ministry. And that's going to be hard. It's going to be tough, but this is where we need to go. This is your next step. And it was interesting seeing it, and I had sympathy for him as I looked back, on my own ministry career at, time earlier where I'm like, yeah, you do take a certain amount of pride in like, I'll just do it. I'll just muscle through. But that doesn't work long-term. And that builds weak ministries and it doesn't build, sustainability into what we're doing.
It's not the model that you want to set. Absolutely. I mean, when you do that, you're setting a very poor model.
This is the unSeminary podcast. Stuff you wish they taught in seminary.
All right, well, we're going to jump into the lightning round, that part of the show where we ask similar questions of everybody that's on the episode. Today we got Todd Adkins with us. Super happy to have you with us, Todd. What's an online resource that you're using these days that's particularly helpful for your ministry?
There's actually two that do something similar, but I use them with different groups. That's Slack and HipChat.
Yep.
And just, like when I got to, if you've ever been in an organization that used more activity streams than email, you will never look back.
Right.
And what that does is it helps us keep short accounts. It helps us ask for things real time without sending an email.
Yep.
Helps us keep track of stuff and share things more easily. It's amazing. And then I use Buffer all the time.
Nice. Idea collection and resending out. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
What's a book you've read in the last, I don't know, maybe 6 months to a year? I know you read a lot. That's had an impact on your thinking or ministry.
Just one?
Yeah, exactly.
Eric Geiger and Kevin Peck. Kevin Peck's the executive pastor at Austin Stone. He's a genius. They have a book out right now called Design to Lead that will outline, again, a lot of what I'm working on, the how-to leadership pipeline. But they do a really good job of laying the foundation of, why do we need leadership development? And they walk through a really healthy it in a really healthy way, looking at creating a conviction, creating a culture, and then dealing with the constructs, the systems and process piece of how this really works. So
Kevin was just on the podcast. I literally just got my copy 2 days ago. Looking forward to jumping into that for sure. That's a great resource, great leader for sure. So.
I guarantee you will underline at least 6 things.
Okay.
In the introduction.
Okay, nice, good. I'll take your challenge.
If not, I will buy you a very good cheeseburger the next time you're in Nashville.
Nice, great.
I'll do that anyway.
Which will be at the Pipeline Conference, so that'll be good. All right. What's a ministry that you're looking to these days that's kind of inspiring you, that you're like, that's a good people to follow and listen and watch?
Well, I would say Stone again, and Austin Stone, and then the Summit Church out of Raleigh-Durham area, J.D. Greer's church. They do an incredible job of sending people out. And in fact, when J.D. closes a service, he says, "You've been sent." It's just a reminder every week of what they're called to do. And so a church plant that I'm on the board of is Restoration City in D.C., and, that church planter went through that program, and then they moved there with like 40 people.
Wow.
40 people picked up their stuff
That's
and
amazing.
moved there. And that story has been repeated dozens of times, if not 100 times by now, within their church, in addition to, the heavy missions component and the global component. And maybe not going for a lifetime, but going for 5 years and doing business as ministry in another place. So I love what they're doing.
Nice. Very cool. If you could get 15 minutes with any leader alive, who would you want to get that with and why? Anybody. Can be anybody. Shoot for the stars.
Oh, my goodness. Like, I don't know why, but I'm really attracted to crazy people.
Okay.
So it's like if I could get in a room with, Kim Jong-un or Putin and just, I don't know, somehow share Jesus with them because they really need that.
Yes.
But also just to like go, how does this person, I'm a profiler. I love all the personality stuff, and I do that with staffs. I do it with my staff. I do it with other churches and stuff. But I love to profile people. So I would just want to be in a room and go, what makes this person tick? What are they talking about? Yeah.
Well, I can say this is the first time that Kim Jong or Putin have been mentioned on the podcast, which is great.
I'm definitely an odd person. So.
There have been a few Billy Graham references over the years, but those are the first of those ones. So I appreciate you, stepping out, which is great. All right. Well, I'm sure, you've got a lot going on. When you just want to kind of sit back and relax, do something for fun. What do you love to do for fun?
I know this is going to sound really strange, but I love algorithms and social, and I love stuff I love trying to figure out things.
Yep.
And so it's really digging into a system and breaking it apart.
Nice.
Figuring out why it's not working. Like my strength finder, my number one is strategic, and the second is maximizer. So I really love those.
Yeah.
Doing that kind of stuff. And then for a while, I really got into building guns.
Building guns? Why didn't you know you could do that?
Oh, heck yeah.
Nice.
Again, rural agricultural background.
Yeah, totally.
So everybody knew how to use their hands, and it's like, this is just parts. So for a while, you couldn't get your hands on guns, but you could get your hands on the parts.
Oh, put them together.
So it was, cool. And I like old World War II stuff, so.
Fun. Well, Todd, I appreciate you being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you or with LifeWay Leadership, how can they do that?
Twitter is at Todd Adkins, and then my email is todd.adkins@lifeway.com.
Nice. Thanks so much, Todd. Really appreciate you being on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out unSeminary Inbox. You can sign up at unseminary.com, and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter at Rich Birch or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.